Hey everyone, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we're going to dive into something that mystifies a lot of online shoppers. Have you ever noticed how certain brands always seem to show up just at the right moment, almost as if they're reading your mind? Ever found yourself being followed by ads that pop up wherever you browse online? Well, it might seem a bit spooky, but rest assured, it's not magic. It's just smart targeting. And today, we're going to demystify it all so you can ensure your marketing hits its mark every single time. We are going to cover a ton, from how to identify the right audiences using demographic and behavioral traits. We're going to talk about how targeting should look as it relates to the marketing funnel and the reasons for segmentation. Then finally, we're going to tie it all together to talk about how and where you should be targeting your audiences. It's going to be jam-packed, so stick around to the end where I share some make or break tips. I'm Nathan Disk, your strategy sidekick, and with that out of the way, let's jump into it. Hopefully by now you already know how important targeting is to any marketing strategy. In order to deliver personalized messaging that grabs attention and drives action, you need to know who you're going to be talking to. And in order to do that, you need to identify who you should be talking to. So before we dive into the real juicy bits about how and where you can target the right people, we first need to cover the important, yet admittedly less sexy fundamentals of it all. And that is how to identify the right target audiences for your business. This is what's really going to set you up for targeting success. By using certain identifying characteristics, you can start to paint a picture of the ideal customer and then build audiences around them. So let's look at some of the most useful identifiers you should be paying attention to as we start thinking about who to target. These include demographic identifiers like age, gender, and income, geographic identifiers like where your customers are located, psychographic identifiers like people's interests and hobbies, technographic identifiers, and lastly, behavioral identifiers like purchase behavior or how users have engaged with your brand. Within these categories, you should be answering questions about what your typical or ideal customer looks like. And we'll talk about using data to inform your answers in a second, but for the most part, you should already have a good understanding of who you want to be selling to. Writing the answers to the questions we talk about down can really help you dial in and focus on who matters most. So, let's talk about what questions you should be asking yourself for each category. And we'll start with demographics. For this category, we want to start painting an image of what your clientele looks like with descriptive characteristics. So you should be answering questions like, what is the general age range that your business most appeals to? What about gender? What gender do your products or services most appeal toward? What about income? Does your brand appeal more toward a certain income group? How about occupation? Is there a certain occupation or position your brand should be targeting? And maybe other characteristics are important to your business as well, like marital status, education level, or ethnicity. Answering these questions will really help you nail down the basics of your audience mix. And while they are basic, they're extremely important. If you're selling women's clothing, you don't want to be targeting men over the age of 50, for example. So once we know the basic demographics of our customers, we can start to pin down some geographic identifiers. So this is stuff like what country, city, or region do your customers reside? If you're doing business locally and in person, this is going to be incredibly important and maybe a bit more restrictive than if you're running an e-commerce store with a nationwide customer base. We also want to be thinking about whether our primary customers are urban or rural. This could also affect how you target people. Lastly, we want to identify climate characteristics. Are you selling warm weather apparel? Well, then you have to be aware of seasonality and the climate in certain areas. Answering these questions will help you nail down where you want to be serving your ads and when. Another important piece of the puzzle. Next is psychographic identifiers, and this is where stuff starts to come to life a little bit more. When we talk about psychographics, we want to be answering questions like, what is their lifestyle like? What are their interests, hobbies, product or brand preferences? Do they have certain values in common? Maybe you're selling environmentally safe products. Well, then maybe your customers really care about being environmentally friendly and they hold that as one of their core values. Then personality traits. Marketing that resonates with a target audience's personality can really increase engagement and effectiveness. Next, we'll talk about technographic identifiers. Weird word, right? What does it mean? Well, technographic identifiers are used to identify what technology people use. For digital marketing, this part is really important. You should be answering questions like, what social media platforms do your ideal customers use most? What websites are they browsing or what content are they consuming? What kind of devices do they have? And if you're B2B, what is the general tech stack used by the company you want to sell to? Most people spend most of their time online nowadays, so it's really important to identify where they are at when they are online. Last but certainly not least is behavioral identifiers. We're going to dig into this more in depth in a second, but this mostly speaks to what actions users have taken with your brand and other brands. So I know that probably all sounds like a lot, right? Well, the reality is these are the questions you need to be answering accurately in order to identify and target the right people. So let's talk about how to answer them more accurately without just using our gut feeling. So like I said before, you probably already know the answers to a lot of these questions. If you're a dress company, as controversial as it might be nowadays, you're going to be selling to mostly women, right? But no matter how much you think you know, always make sure your data backs you up. I've seen it so many times where businesses think they know who their customers are, but when you dig into the data, they are dead wrong. This leads to a lot of misaligned messaging and missed opportunity. So what do I mean by data, and how can we use it to help inform us? Well, data in this context refers to the tangible evidence gathered from various sources about your customers and how they've interacted with your brand. First and foremost, you have purchase data, or the data that's in your CRM. This is a great first source for a couple of reasons. The first being, these are your ideal customers since they've already purchased from you in the past. And secondly, you probably have the most data on them already. But if you're just starting out and don't have a lot of transactional data, don't worry, there are other sources you can look at. You can look at things like social media or website engagement to determine what type of people interact with you the most. Doing this allows you to analyze behavioral actions too. You can look at competitors to see what their target market looks like and compare yourself to them. You can also look at your ad platforms to test and see what audiences resonate most with your brand. Or you could actually go out and do some market research like surveys or test groups. So the data is there. You just have to make sure you're using it to inform yourself. And what you'll likely find is that you have a broad range of customers with differing traits, but that's okay. At least we have our starting point. But it's essential to pinpoint the segments that are most valuable so you can focus your marketing efforts effectively. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, I'm going to veer off and talk about segmentation so we're all on the same page. So, segmentation. Segmentation involves dividing your broad customer base into more manageable subgroups that are more likely to respond to personalized messaging. These segments can be based on any of the identifiers we've already discussed, from demographics to behavioral patterns. There are three main reasons why you'd want to segment your audience. The first is that you want to deliver more personalized messaging to a more specific set of people. The second is that you want to gather data on a specific group of people, maybe for testing purposes. And the last is that you want to control how much resources you put toward a select group of people, maybe like adding more advertising budget to a specific audience. So keep those in mind, but if you find yourself splitting up your audiences a million different ways just because, you're probably wasting your time. But it is extremely useful when we talk about a targeting strategy as it relates to the marketing funnel. And if you're not familiar with what a marketing funnel is, make sure you check out our other video, Mastering the Marketing Funnel. So with the data you've gathered and segmentation top of mind, we can start to create the audiences that you want to target. And like I said, your data is probably going to be all over the place with different characteristics. But in order to deliver personalized messaging, we need to start to organize people and place them in metaphorical buckets. And we're going to start by identifying the type of consumers you want to attract to your brand. These are people who are in market and likely to buy, but haven't interacted with your brand yet. In other words, the cold top of funnel audiences. Now, we have no data on these people. They haven't visited your website or interacted with your brand on any level. But by using the characteristics of the people who you do have data on, you can start to build an image of what these audiences actually look like. A great tool for this is something called a customer persona. And all this is a fun little exercise that you can do to create distinct profiles of some key segments in your broader audience. By creating these profiles, you can get a clearer picture of the segments that you actually want to target. So let's pretend I own a Hawaiian shirt company called The Hip Hawaiian, so we can walk through an example of a customer persona together. All right, so with the hypothetical data I've gathered through transactions and customer engagement, I can tell that my broad audience consists of a few key identifiers. The first is that the primary age range of my broad audience is between 18 and 55. It's primarily made up of males. My product sells nationally, and most of my sales come through organic search and social media like Facebook and Instagram. But looking at this data, it's really broad and hard to be precise with my targeting and messaging. So I need to refine it a little bit more, and I'll create a few customer personas to help. So let's start at the top with demographics. Maybe my data for the Hip Hawaiian is showing me that while I do sell across a broad age range, most of my sales actually come from males who are 18 to 26 years old. So we can use this to focus a bit more on this key demographic. By continuing to use our data and sourcing more outside data, we can find more commonalities between our top engagers and then engineer the perfect customer. Starting with our perfect customer being a male between the ages of 18 and 26 years old. Let's call him Kyle. Then, by continuing to parse through data, we can fill in the gaps and build out the rest of his profile. Maybe our data suggests his occupation is a student or an early career professional. His income level is probably entry level to moderate as he's just starting out in his career. He lives in coastal cities where beach culture is prominent, maybe such as California. His personality is laid back and go with the flow. His hobbies are maybe he plays golf and he values social life heavily. He's most active on Instagram and Snapchat, and he frequently purchases online and enjoys other brands like certain golf attire brands and maybe Sperry shoes. And as you can see, Kyle here has really started to come to life. And of course, while he is made up, we can use this to inform our top of funnel targeting segments. Since Kyle is the perfect customer, we know we want to focus on people who look similar to him and create personalized messaging. So we can use Kyle's identifiable traits to target and create audience segments. So then maybe we can segment and target men on Instagram who are between the ages of 18 and 26 years old and like to play golf. Then we can deliver them personalized messaging and test and see how well they resonate with our brand. The point being is that customer personas are a great way to make people you don't have any data on come to life. Then you can use those characteristics to create segments and deliver personalized messaging to them. You shouldn't just be making one persona either. Make a bunch, especially if you've identified other groups or commonalities that are high performers. So, not only is this a fun little exercise, but it really helps you paint an idea of what the characteristics are that you should be targeting for your brand. So that's how we identify cold, top of funnel audiences that we don't have a lot of data on. But what about the people that we do? We want to be able to retarget them. So we care less about their identity and more about the actions they've taken with our brand. Some of the more common buckets we can put people in are engagers on social media, website visitors, people who have viewed a product, people who have added a product to their cart, people on our email list, or maybe people who have purchased once or more than once in the past. Like I said, one of the most important reasons we segment our audiences is to deliver personalized messaging. So you should really be thinking about what messaging you want to deliver to certain people. Maybe you want to cross-sell items to people who have purchased a specific item in the past. So you could target people who have purchased that item and then follow up with messaging that tries to sell them a different product. Now, we'll cover cross-selling and upselling more in a different video, but hopefully you get the idea. Another important thing to think about is where you're going to reach your audience at. And this is going to kind of come down to the specific characteristics that your target audience has. This is going to be unique to your business. And in today's digitized world, this often comes down to the technographic identifiers we just discussed. For the Hip Hawaiian, I know my ideal customer base spends most of their time on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. So I probably want to focus my efforts there. So again, identifying your audience is the most important step. From there, it's just learning how to press the right buttons. All right, that all may sound like a lot, and ambiguous terms like data got thrown around a bunch, and you might not be familiar with it. Well, the reality is once you're able to accurately identify your audiences, the rest is fairly easy. Analytical tools and ad platforms like Meta make it really easy to track and analyze your audience segments. You can sift through the data provided on these platforms to create custom parameters of who you want to target or retarget. But always be focused on gathering as much data as you can to inform your decisions. This is why building a big email list is so important to any modern business. Think about it. People use their email for everything. It acts as a sort of digital identity. Once you have people's email, it'll be a lot easier for you to reach them wherever they are at online. So let's outline some actions you can take with this information. Start by analyzing your data and answer those identifying questions I outlined. Then you can start creating some customer personas to identify your ideal customers. Then analyze where your audience is and the best way to reach them. If your audience is super old and computer illiterate, maybe TV or mail is the best way to reach them. If not, and they spend most of their time online, identify where they're at online so you can make sure you're reaching them more effectively. Once you've done that, you have the basis of your targeting strategy. And the last tip I'll give is that your audiences might not look the same forever. So be constantly using your data to monitor the performance of each audience and see how they shift over time. Then update your customer personas and your audiences accordingly to be most effective. If you do that, you'll be sure to sell more.